Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Super fired up about the podcast we have coming your way today. We're going to preview Kansas versus Arizona State. And to do so, we've got one of the best in the business, Chris Karpman, who covers Arizona State for 24/7 Sports. Chris, thanks a bunch for jumping on the podcast. Sounds like you guys have had a busy week full of access and everything.
Yeah, we always are jam-packed covering ASU because of the access being so good. We're at 90% of all the practice times open, and we get to do a lot of reporting. Of course, ASU had this negotiated resolution that came out today with the former staff. I know Kansas is very familiar with the waiting game for those kinds of things. So, yeah, so 40 months at ASU of dealing with that, kind of always kind of on the back burner. But I think they're through it now. And this is a big game. I look at this game against Kansas as being maybe the biggest on the schedule for ASU. And the reason I say that is coming off of a bye week, first Big 12 opportunity at home. Bowl eligibility, I think, becomes significantly more achievable with a win. And a loss, I think, could make bowl eligibility a nail-biter that could go all the way down to the Territorial Cup against Arizona. And that's not something that ASU or its fans want.
No, that reminds me of the 2022 season for Kansas, when it felt like for a while it was going to come down to the Sunflower Showdown at the end of the season. And for KU, obviously, they were able to do it against Oklahoma State. I do want to go back, though, to the start for Kenny Dillingham, because obviously took over a precarious, I think, situation at Arizona State. How has he gone about turning this around, where here we are, right, year two, and Arizona State is 3-1, bowl eligibility, like you said, is totally in the picture. How has he gone about rebuilding this roster and program to the point where it can have the confidence going into a game against Kansas and just looking ahead, have the confidence to get to a bowl game?
The culture was really a mess. The roster was in bad shape. So many guys had transferred because of the NCAA situation, the coaching staff being really sort of imperiled. And that was like a slow sort of a death for about a 2-year period. The benefit that Dillingham was able to take advantage of was the NCAA getting rid of, or at least suspending, the rule of the 25 annual new scholarship players. That was massive. ASU in 1 year added 50-something players. And in this 2-year period, they have more new players than the 85 scholarship cap, because a lot of the seniors from last year were 1-year guys already cycled out. There's only 5 players on the roster who were on the team 2 seasons ago. So that is a stunning thing. Only one of those players is a sophomore or less, third-year sophomore. So he totally cleaned house. And as part of doing that, of course, you have a very different culture that you are establishing and putting into place, and your way of doing things. Last year, they had extreme amount of injuries, really from the outset of the season. They had 6 or 7 of their top 10 offensive linemen go down, and they were playing their 4th string quarterback by their 3rd game of the season. So they had catastrophic offensive injuries that really prevented any ability to get into an offensive rhythm. And then that just prevented their record. Plus, they were terrible at turnover margin and generating turnovers, which is such a key stat in football. This year, they are, I think, tied for second with 3 defensive touchdowns already. They have a very good turnover margin. And Kansas fans understand the difference between when you have a team that doesn't turn the ball over a lot versus a team that turns the ball over a lot, especially in crucial situations and close games. And that can either make a team look a lot worse or a lot better, maybe perhaps than it is in some occasions. ASU is not very good. I don't necessarily even think ASU is better than Kansas in terms of its talent. I'd say they're somewhat close, maybe. I'll know better after watching Saturday, getting an up close look. But the 3-1 start is absolutely good, particularly when considering the team was picked 16th in the preseason media poll.
Yeah, and that's something the Big 12 that, I mean, Lance Leipold's talked about this countless times. Every year, it's like whoever's picked last is basically guaranteed to not finish last, right? It happened with Baylor. I think the year they went to the Big 12 title game, it's happened with Kansas the year they went to a bowl game. Like, happens every year, and it seems like Arizona State is that team this year. I'm curious, the 3-1 start, you mentioned your thoughts on Arizona State as a team overall. What has either surprised you most about this team, or what maybe were your expectations going into this season, and how has the start maybe changed the expectations or just surprised you generally?
I thought some of the matchups were good for ASU. Like, I thought ASU would be, before the season, I thought this would be a 5 or a 6 win team. I was very on the fence about that. But then when I got into looking at these matchups, ASU played Wyoming, Mississippi State, at Texas State, I thought that they were pretty good for ASU. And I picked ASU to win all of those games, actually. And the things that are a surprise, though, were you can't expect 3 defensive touchdowns like early in the season, never. And that was a catalyst for their ability to win some of these games. They also, I knew Cam Scadaboo would be a crucial player, the star senior running back, but he had 262 rushing yards against Mississippi State at home. Not going to really expect that. That was a record for him. Kansas has a phenomenal running back. I think the best that ASU will play this year or maybe in a couple of years. But so they can relate to that. But the ground game really didn't translate on the road as well as I expected it to, going to Texas State and Texas Tech, especially Texas Tech, because that was a style where guys kind of lined up in the same place, and you knew like how linemen would be able to get off and block against them, and a lot of their zone stuff. Like Kansas runs a lot of outside zone, ASU does. And ASU's interior linemen are very veteran, experienced players. Lee Fautanu, Ben Coleman at left guard, Cade Briggs at right guard. Like those guys have all started 30-something games, something in their college careers, but they played poorly in the run game. Very good in pass pro, but poorly in the run. And that was kind of a surprise. So this, for ASU, this is a team that has to run the ball well, because redshirt freshman starting quarterback Sam Levitt, he's got upside, but he's not ready from a polishing standpoint to be able to execute when the team also isn't running the ball.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how that is going to look on Saturday. It's a good defense, and this is going to be a huge test, particularly with the run defense. But ASU is a top 30 run defense in the country and has played against some pretty good teams as far as their ability to run the ball. So that's going to be a strength versus strength thing that I'm looking forward to watching.
We mentioned the quarterback position there. I mean, this time last year, Jaden Rashada was in the quarterback room, and I think everyone's seeing what's happened with Matthew Sluka at UNLV has brought back, I think, memories for some people of Rashada. Talks about the quarterback room, because obviously he transferred in the spring. Was Levitt someone that was going to win the job in spring? Is he someone that benefited from that departure? What's the coaching staff kind of feel about the quarterback position? How is that trending into camp and into the first 2 weeks of season now?
Yeah. Rashada, super talented guy, but also the maturity and the work ethic left something to be desired. When he came back from a knee injury, that he had a meniscus surgery last year, he missed like the middle 8 games. He was going to come back and start against Arizona. In fact, we reported it. And then the day later, he was late for a team meeting by 10 minutes at the hotel, and he ended up not starting. And so that was a very prime example. And then he hurt his thumb, which required surgery, from what he said was moving boxes before spring football, as he was going to move homes. So he wasn't able to practice for the first 3 weeks of spring ball. after they had brought in Sam Levitt and Jeff Sims. And so it just put him really behind the eight ball, and there were a lot of frustrations. And then Levitt performed quite well in spring ball. And I think that I think Rashad saw, okay, the writing's a little bit on the wall here. At best, I'm maybe equal, and I'm probably a little bit behind. And he just decided that wasn't what he wanted to be involved in. And so, going to Georgia, that's a high profile place. But then I saw there was some feedback that came out of camp that said very strongly that he was like not in the top three.
Oh, wow.
Among their quarterbacks. So, but Levitt has done a very good job in practices of not turning the ball over and just being solid. And that's what you can work with as a coaching staff. He's had 2 interceptions this season in 4 games. Neither one of the interceptions was a bad read. One was a throw that was to his tight end that was a little bit high, and it was tipped into the hands of a safety. And then he had one against Texas Tech where he got hit as he threw the ball, which I think contributed to the ball getting a little bit high on him. But it was a good read. And he's an athletic guy. He's someone that can scramble for the marker on third downs when teams are playing man coverage. He's got a big arm. He can get the ball down the field. But accuracy is where he needs a lot of work, and reading coverages. I would say in those areas, it's going to still be a while, but I think that his upside is good.
Interesting. Well, and you mentioned athletic quarterbacks. I'm sure every single KU fan was like, oh no, not again. KU's really struggled with some mobile quarterbacks, Garrett Green, at West Virginia, obviously Matthew Sluka made a name for himself with the way he played against KU. So that'll have to be something to watch, especially for KU if Cornell Wheeler isn't able to play, because he's been the guy that at times has been the spy, and KU's going to need some good linebacker play. I'm curious, you mentioned Scatabo a little bit earlier. Did he come out of nowhere? Was he someone that the coaching staff tabbed going into camp, like, hey, this is going to be our number one running back? Or was he kind of a pleasant surprise that came out of training camp?
Last year, he arrived after being one of the top FCS running backs in 2022. He had 1,400 rushing yards or something like that at Sacramento State. And last year, he took the vast majority of the snaps. They did decide to go out and add some transfers. Raleek Brown from USC, but he's had a hamstring that's kept him out mostly. He's going to be back in this game, so I think that he'll get a little bit more of a role, and they could even play some 2-back structures between Scatabo and Brown. But I think what really sort of allowed Scatabo to solidify himself this year was he lost 10, 15 pounds in the offseason. He's leaner, lighter, a little more athletic. He's a physical back. Like, he's a guy that will make you feel his presence and is a little intimidating to tackle. He's got very good contact balance, but he's not a burner. He's not a make you miss guy. He's not very elusive. He doesn't have great top end speed. He's not going to run away from the defense or anything like that. A lot of his stuff they're hard yards that he gets. And he's also, skilled and pretty savvy for the type of player that he is, which helps. When things are going well for ASU, he's going to get 25 plus carries. Like, if he ends up getting that many carries, that's one of the big things I would look for in this game, because what really should happen if Kansas's defense is doing well is he's under 20 carries, and it's a lot more of Sam Levitt having to scramble for his life, run to extend drives, or thread the needle on passes. And that's also, of course, not giving up the home run ball, which ASU is going to try to get a few shots in.
Yeah. I was looking at some of the numbers defensively for Arizona State, and it feels like I think a lot of stuff about Arizona State, honestly, right now, when I look at like the numbers and the way the season has played out, reminds me a little bit of the 2022 season for Kansas, where early on plays pretty well comprehensive football. Defensively, it seems like they're a team that would like to theoretically limit big plays, make teams try and execute over the course of a drive. And obviously to do that, you got to stop the run consistently. The front seven for Arizona State, just what have you seen from that group so far this year, and who are maybe a couple guys just to have on the radar for Kansas fans?
Yeah, they've done a good job, and they've been banged up, actually. There have been games where 2 or 3 of their top defensive linemen haven't played. 2 of their top, 5 linebackers haven't played, but they're getting healthier now. I think their best pass rusher is probably Clayton Smith. He plays on the right end usually, so he'll be going up against the left tackle. He's a guy that's got a good versatility to the way he pass rushes. On the interior, Jeff Clark is probably their best interior pass rusher and most dynamic tackle. He's been playing with a cast on his hand, which has, I think, been a little bit of a limiting factor. And then CJ Fight is probably their best overall D tackle as far as run pass. He's strong, physical. He's in better shape this year. They got Prince Dorba back last week from a knee injury that kept him out of the first 3 games. He's a good pass rusher, also on the edge as he gets kind of built up. But there's linebacker level, Keyshawn Elliott's one of their top tacklers, and he's a very solid, good player. They don't really have anybody that's like an all-conference caliber guy, I don't think. Maybe Clayton Smith has a chance if he gets hot, with some sacks. But more so, I just think that they're overall very sound, and it's an aggressive scheme to what you're talking about. Brian Ward, the defensive coordinator, likes to say that ASU is trying to stop the run on the way to the quarterback. And so they're not that concerned with, it's not a 2-gapping read and react. They're very much trying to get uphill and create problems in the backfield for opponents.
Yeah, that sounds just like Kansas with the way they do it. One gap, get up the field, and create knockback and all. Yeah, I get that. In the secondary, I watched the Texas State game and I thought the secondary looked pretty solid. Have they lived, what were your expectations for that group going into the year? And have they exceeded it? Obviously they scored defensive touchdowns, so they're doing something right, but has that group been consistent in between those plays? Talk to us a little bit about kind of the secondary overall.
Yeah. So the safeties were probably, what I thought to be the strength of their defense going into the season. They've had a couple of injuries. Well, they had one season-ending injury, Cole Martin, who's a nickel, and then another player, Mason Williams, retired, which led them to move Shamari Simmons from free safety to nickel. He was their team and defensive MVP last year. He's done a very good job at nickel. Xavier Alford, who was at USC before he transferred in, is a very good free safety. And then their strong safety, Miles Rouser, is leading the team in tackles. He's got an NFL prospect, former 4-star recruit at a high school in Michigan. He ended up having to go to an FCS school due to some academic and other issues. Played his way up through 2 schools to get to ASU. He's had a couple games where he had 12 plus tackles. They blitz him a lot. He's in the backfield quite a bit, so he's a guy that you have to pay a lot of close attention to. The corners I thought would be maybe a vulnerability going into the season because they were very untested. Javen Robinson, who transferred in from Washington State's done a very good job in his first year starting. I think he's their best coverage player. And then on the other side, Keith Abney is somebody that, for a sophomore who didn't play much last year, I think he's been reasonably solid. Teams are going at him a little bit more. He's had several penalties in some situations where he gets a little bit nervous, I think, situationally. So that's probably where Kansas might try to attack. But he's not bad. He's actually a very smart and reasonably sound player. He doesn't have great top end speed. So some of the bigger play attacks is where he might be a little bit more vulnerable.
Got it. That's good information. So, all right, Chris, let's take a big picture look at this game then. what do you think are the big keys for Arizona State to either win the game, keep it close in the fourth quarter? And we've seen Kansas struggle late in games to close. Just what are some of your keys to get Arizona State to that point or to win the game?
Well, Brian Ward's teams typically generate a lot of turnovers. They've averaged over 20 turnovers per season in like 12 or 13 years of him being a coordinator. And so much of that comes from strip sacks and or forcing opposing quarterbacks to thread the needle on third downs. So really what that means, I think, is if ASU can do a reasonably solid job against the run on early downs to make Jalen Daniels have to thread the needle, if you will, that's a recipe for ASU to probably be able to get a turnover or two, maybe get to the quarterback for a sack, negative yardage and or turnovers. It's always one of the most important facets of the game. I think that's really key, coupled with not giving up big plays, of course. And then I noticed Kansas has been very good in the red zone, and ASU hasn't been a good red zone team on either side, particularly. So I really feel like in a game that probably won't have a ton of points, like it'll probably be somewhere in the 20s to low 30s is my guess. I think converting the drives into touchdowns is a huge factor as well. And then in this game in particular, I think depth may come into play, particularly if it ends up being a higher snap count game due to how hot it's going to be. It's going to be 104 degrees roughly at kickoff. And that puts a lot of pressure on teams to be able to rotate without having too much of a drop off. So getting 3 and outs, right? I think that's also a pretty whoever gets more 3 and outs, I think has an advantage in this game.
Yeah, that's good stuff. A little tidbit for you, Chris. KU has an indoor facility, and this week they, according to one of the players at least, they cranked up the heat in the indoor facility to be one of the players said 100 degrees. I doubt it got that hot in the indoor, but he said they cranked it up. So they're trying to find a way to replicate the Arizona heat. And I'm not too sure if that's possible because I'm not. Yeah, it's going to be a hot one.
So. And you know what? Honestly, one of the biggest things that I've noticed over the years from teams visiting ASU in the heat, a lot of it is about hydrating in the day beforehand. It's really not even once the game starts, because the cramping usually is a lot of it comes from guys when they arrive a day or two earlier not taking in enough fluids. So I think really if Kansas is doing a good job in that part of it, that will mitigate to some degree the actual challenge within the game.
That's really good insight. I had not thought about it as preemptive hydration for that. That's interesting. Well, Chris, for folks that want to go check out the rest of your work, where else can they find your website, your stuff on Twitter? Where can they find you?
SunDevilSource.com or ASU247.com. It works fine. My ad is at Chris Karpman, just like you see it on the screen, and for on X or whatever they call it nowadays. And if anybody have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them about the people making the trip, or even if you want me to start a thread on the board or something like that, where I can answer some questions what people might have about making the trip. I'd be glad to help. It's, this is new for us with ASU joining the Big 12 and vice versa. And so there's a lot of new trips that people are making. We were talking about it before we even recorded. And I'd be happy to pop in there. In fact, I'll go in there and do that after we get done here.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yeah. Talking about with people at Kansas this week. It's fun, get to go see new places, and it's not the same Stillwater, Norman, Ames. It's something new. And so I'm looking forward to it. It should be a really fun game. Well, Chris, thanks a bunch. We'll see you on Saturday.
Appreciate it, Michael.